Welcome to the Non-Sequitur Show. Continual watching beyond this point may result in terminal face palming and a complete loss of wokeness. You have been warned.
Hey, welcome to the NonSequitur Show. We were going to have a debate discussion on is atheism irrational. We've all concluded that it isn't irrational, or we're going to go home. Thank you very much for joining us. This was a great show. Really appreciate you guys showing up for that. You guys put up a hell of a fight, though. I got to admit, I mean, I was impressed. But no, okay. So let me kind of tell you people what's going to go on here. We got a few people in here. We got Joshua from the Christian Resistance Project, or what is it called? Christian Resistance Initiative.
Christian Resistance Podcast. It's very small.
That's it. I like, you know what? I like the Christian. We got Jim Hall from Atheist Edge.
Hello.
And we got Craig Reed from Craig Reed Channel.
From Craig Reed Channel,
Yes.
Craig Reed TCR.
Yes, exactly. So you guys had, I was actually.
We're big. We're
guys are
big. Too big to fail.
massive. I'm telling you. No, I actually do like your channel, Craig. You actually are one of the more objective, I think, theist commentators out there. I mean, I don't agree with everything, but you put things out fairly, and I respect that. But you guys had actually wanted to have a debate discussion. Is atheism irrational? And I'm like, you know what? I could put on my atheist hat for that. I can actually argue not just atheism is rational, but I can argue for atheism. And then I got Jim Hall here, who is an atheist. So I think between two of us, we might be able to counter your points, not just put out there, oh, we don't believe you, blah, 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 the atheist talking points, but actually have an actual discussion on the topic. So what I kind of figured we'd do this. Josh, why don't you kind of start us off? Take whatever time you need. You explain to us why you believe atheism is irrational. Jim will kind of give a little rebuttal, then Craig, and then I'll follow up from behind him and get to have like a free-for-all debate discussion. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Cool. Do your thing, man.
Well, atheism is irrational, and it can't be intelligibly affirmed. Let me get this out of the way. Theism offers a transcendent grounding that gives a complete and rational explanation that is based on a cumulative case delineated on the principles of common sense and inference to the best explanation. Atheism runs counter to common sense and actually presupposes a lot of the dictates of common sense, such as the law of proportionate causality, that things don't just pop into existence uncaused out of nothing. There's always a reason or an explanation for anything that happens in the world. In fact, without the principle of sufficient reason, we would have no reason to trust our cognitive faculties concerning the external world. In fact, many atheists have been skeptical of the existence of the external world, of other minds existing, of natural law, of a hierarchy of values that we all live by. In fact, if you say some actions are better than others or are worse than others, you are presupposing a natural law from which to make a measurement of those values. So I think there are a number of reasons or signposts that falsify atheism. Now, here's just a couple of signposts. I'm not going to go into this because it's an opening, and I'm sure we'll get into that in our dialogue. But the beginning of the universe. The beginning of the universe makes the atheist very uncomfortable because of the obvious theistic implications. I have many quotes from leading physicists, astrophysicists. The Borg-Good-Blanken theorem also shows that there was an absolute beginning of space-time. Stephen Hawking, I think it was on page 96 on his Brief History of Time, he says, almost everybody now believes that time and space had a beginning at the Big Bang. But I have countless quotes and that I've read on these. I think that's about it. I'll stop with my opening, but I think there are good reasons to be a theist. The design of the universe, the beginning of the universe, the reason why there's change at all in the universe. Now, how does the atheist account for this? Change is an obvious fact. Now, if there's change or contingent things in reality, well, this implies something that is changeless, that can't go under, is not affected by change. That is the originator, the cause and the sustainer of any change or any contingent beings that are around. So I'll stop there, but I think there's good reasons to reject atheism and to affirm theism.
Okay. I'm glad you didn't go off like 100 different things, because we don't want to overload Jim here. So he'll respond to you, but is there one specific thing that you want him to hit on in his? Because you talked about a lot of the things, and each one can be spoken up for like 2 hours. So is there one specific thing you may want him to address?
Well, I have two.
Okay, go to
the intelligibility of the universe, how we have to presuppose a sufficient explanation for everything.
Okay.
If we don't, we get into an infinite regress of nothing and don't explain anything. And the second is the fact that there's change in the world. And if we admit that there's change in the world, this implies something that is behind that change, something that exists by the necessity of its own being, that can cause that change.
All right, Jim, have fun with that.
Okay, no, Josh, that was not a Gish Gallop. I've heard Gish Gallops before, but that was definitely not it. It was a lot of information, though. I'll do my best.
I'm not going to call it a Gish Gallop either.
Yeah.
Actually.
So I will take it all in reverse order. So I did write down those two that you wanted me to address specifically. I got 2 to 5 minutes, right, Steve? And I'm going in completely cold. I didn't have the pen to paper until literally when we started. So all this is right now. First thing, I suspect that Steve had ulterior motives for calling it this show what he did, because today is International Pi Day 3.14, which is an irrational number. I don't know if you did that on purpose, Steve.
It was not, but I'm aware today is Pi Day.
Yes.
Wow.
It's an irrational number. So what is reason? What is
too?
Yes.
Game over. Let's go home. Sorry.
Oh, that's fine. No, go ahead and keep stepping on my time, Steve. That's totally fine. We'll take it out of yours, though. What is rational? Rational is based on or in accordance with reason or logic. And, well, spoiler alert, I'm about to tell you that, Josh, you guys, your side is just as rational as mine. And that's how I'm going to end with it. And that leads me to a great segue. I've only done one formal debate. Not that this is anything formal debate. It's the closest thing in a while for me online. And I did it. I won before this, and it was Robert Rowe, aka General Han Solo. I lost horribly. We talked about the Trinity. I got my ass kicked. I think formal debates are unproductive because there's this kind of stuff where it's a monologue. You don't get a word in edgewise. So at least a half to 2/3 of a formal debate is unproductive. I like back and forth where it's, and me personally, I am seeking the truth. I'm not trying to win. And so if I concede the point too much, where I will say to Josh, sometime tonight it's going to happen. Oh my gosh, you got a great point. If you do that in a debate, you've just lost. You know what I'm saying? Okay, so accordance with reason or logic. In a court of law, there are types of evidence. There's good evidence, there's bad evidence. I believe Christians have nothing more than anecdotal, empirical at best, hearsay testimony. This is all forms of evidence. Well, hearsay is not admissible in court, but there's lots of very weak, very flimsy evidence that's admissible in court, but it's still evidence. And if you take that position, it does not mean you are irrational. In fact, if you've had a personal anecdotal testimony, like Jesus entered your heart, and that's the only evidence you've got. He came into your spirit and you felt him, like not C.S. Lewis. So who's the one that saw the three frozen waterfalls and came, Francis Crick, I believe it was. It found Jesus out in the woods one day when he saw the frozen waterfall. You know what? That's even still rational to me. If you're coming at it with accordance with reason or logic. Conversely, atheism has a lot of evidence too. And like Steve said, we're not the ones that say, oh, we're just lack of, we're not those type of, I'm not that type of atheist. Steve told me a long time ago, and I agree with it, even though we don't have positive claims, I still have, as an atheist, I still have the burden of justification for my position. Okay, okay, so now I'm going to get to Josh's, what he said. So you said, okay, so good evidence for God, and atheism is rational because we go our whole lives, I'm going to try to steelman you, we go our whole lives trying to we have to presuppose that everything is here, we have to presuppose that reality is real and we're not living in a simulation, for instance. You said a lot of presuppositions have to occur, and I agree. We would not get anywhere, this debate. You wouldn't get down the street if you didn't presuppose that reality was real. So presuppositions do have to occur. I don't think that's evidence, for Christianity being correct or for atheism being irrational. Second is it requires change, and that an intelligent agent, a super intelligent or maybe divinely intelligent agent had to have started the everything in motion. That's a presupposition in itself. You said the Big Bang. You cited. I'm getting some feedback. Okay. You said the Big Bang had to. All these scientists concede that the Big Bang had a beginning. Well, the Big Bang doesn't mean that this at t equals 0, the singularity had already existed. When time and space started, the singularity was already there. So my question to you all, you can table this for later, but when was there nothing? When was there nothing? That's what I'm going to ask you. And I don't want to get into a first cause debate, but if we're going to go to a first cause, when the t equals 0, when the inflation began, we have no idea. See, before, what does it mean before that? That's irrational right there. Say what was before t equals 0. Anyway, I think I've already covered my allotted time.
No, that works.
And I'm rambling. I hope you guys got some nugget of wisdom out of that a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah, it works for me. Craig, do you want to go next? I will. Before you go, though, it's just because it's not having to do with the topic, just when it comes to debates. No, I have to agree about, I think debates are non-productive for the most part. I think debatable topics are things of a nature where there's no objective fact to be matter to be had. I meat, when you're weighing things on political things where people are saying, hey, should we build this bridge? Should we not build this bridge? What's the economic, concerns? These are all debatable subjects. But, if I want to debate that 1 + 1 = 2 and somebody wants to debate that's wrong, of course it's not debatable. So I find discussions to be far more interesting than any kind of formal debate, unless there is a reason to have a reason to say this person is probably more correct than this person because of actual things that are just have no objective way of looking at it. And I believe that the God thing is there's no objective way of knowing one or another. But anyways, Craig, you want to go next?
Sure. I agree actually a lot about debates. When I'm watching a debate, I almost never the only thing that criteria I judge a debate on is, are these people credible and intelligent, and is this worth my time to watch them? Is atheism irrational? Depends on which type of atheist. Now, I put out a video a couple days ago where about what I call the debate me bro atheists. I believe Steve calls them trademark new atheists. Certain type of atheists in the atheist community who, got any evidence? I said evidence. Where's your evidence? Who play fallacy bingo? Those guys are absolutely pretty much irrational. Can the conclusion that God doesn't exist, can that be a rational conclusion? It can be on at least two occasions that I can think of. So I'm gonna play it down the middle. I'm gonna take both sides of the argument because I think there are, in principle, atheists who are reasonable human beings. Okay, I don't necessarily agree with the conclusions they came to, but the question being asked is, did they arrive at those conclusions through a justification process that is at least reasonable in principle? So the two types of atheists that I do think are rational. On my channel, I've interviewed Apologia and Drew, both of whom were raised in a type of really trippy fundamentalist Christianity that was actually kind of toxic and was trying to teach them things that were, honest, at first glance, false. For example, young earth creationism. If the choice is binary, okay, it's not binary, but if it were, and you are saying atheism versus a trippy type of Christianity that has a lot of false, misleading information in it, then yeah, atheism is the more honest position between those two poles. So that's pretty much a rational, because I asked myself when I was interviewing Drew, okay, Drew seems pretty reasonable to me, seems like an honest person. And the question I was asking myself is, why is he an atheist? And then he gave me an answer that kind of made sense to me, given where he come from, given his priors, given his precepts. The second type of atheism I find reasonable, the guys always cite the Answers from Reason crew. If I had to ask them why they're atheists, I've never asked, but if I had to guess, it's because they're English. And in English, when you're raised English, atheism is in the air, secularism is in the air. You just kind of adopt the priors of your community at large. The same reason I'm a Democrat. I was raised in upper middle class Westchester society where, you don't even question it. You're 15 years old and your friends all say, like, Ronald Reagan. Everybody I knew was a liberal Democrat. Everyone in my family's a liberal Democrat. Everybody I knew at college was a liberal Democrat. You don't even question it. You just go, of course I'm a liberal Democrat. You think it's normal. It's not until you actually get out and you start experiencing things that you're like, oh, wait a minute. Do I actually believe this? Are my precepts what deconstruction actually is? You can do for being a liberal Democrat. You take your priors out into the cold light of day. You examine them. Are these robust and defendable? Are these justifiable? Do they make sense? So I kind of agree with some of the things that Josh was saying about, I don't want to get too technical with everybody, but there's the Platonic realm, and the way I would define the Platonic realm that's entered in the general lexicon is, do you ascribe reality to the transcendent realm? That's what a Platonist is in modern terms. So you have like a mathematical Platonist, a mathematical nominalist, a mathematical fictionalist. Most of the atheists, not most, but I'd say about half the atheists who are trademark new atheist debate me bros, they are scientismists, which means they say philosophy is dead, and it actually comes from even people, high up people who are actually accredited scientists, I think, who should know better. Guys like Neil deGrasse Tyson has said things like that. Philosophy's over. We have science now. And the problem is you can't do science without a coherent philosophy of science, because your brain will plug in things that are absolutely indefensible and incoherent. That's why you have ostensibly intelligent people floating around on Twitter who will defend propositions that make literally no sense, like arguments aren't evidence. If, why would anybody construct an argument if it wasn't, in fact, evidence for some supporting proposition? Why on earth would you construct an argument otherwise? Of course it's evidence. What they mean is it's not empirical. Now, that's true, but this is why you have to kind of, if you're talking about intelligibility, where I kind of agree with Josh, okay, is you do have to dip your little toe into the Platonic realm. You can be a nominalist, which is, uncommitted, but you think that you have to ascribe some reality to the Platonic realm somewhere along the way, if you want to make sense of things. So, like, you can't do science without math. If you know Gödel's incompleteness theorem, okay, you have to assume the mathematical axiom in order to use it, and axiomatic means self-evident. Let me know when I could go on for 2 hours about this stuff.
Oh,
so
no, I know you can. Please don't.
I won't. So let me know when my time's up. I'll just stop.
Look, just whenever you want to like wrap it up. I mean, you put forth a lot of already. I mean, so if you want to like just
right. Well,
tie it in a bow.
I'm not trying to win anything. I'm really interested. I watched Atheist Edge's channel, And I thought it was really good. He actually doesn't define himself as an atheist. He said to the guy, he said he's a soft evidential agnostic. So
That's
he's
correct.
already got a kind of nuanced in between middle position. A lot of philosophical intelligent atheists already have, like, in whatever place, like philosophy of mind, Emerson Green, the reason why he started becoming a panpsychist is because he already had, like, you know, a defensible, robust, sort of nuanced in between position. Almost all intelligent people start to construct that automatically, and atheists can do it too. So pure atheism that heeds too close to scientism, that's incoherent. But a lot of atheists are already, like, on the way to becoming philosophical atheists, where they, you know, think about things and try and ask themselves relevant questions. Are these things justifiable? Do I have, you know, can I support the things that I believe undergirding my beliefs? As far as God doesn't exist, you know, atheists, I would never expect anybody to believe in God absent a spiritual experience or religious experience. I don't see how it happens otherwise. So
that makes a lot of sense to me, actually. All right, so let me kind of take a stab at this, because you guys are like have talked about a lot of different things. And Craig, I happen to, believe it or not, agree with a lot of things you just said.
I figured you would, actually.
Yeah, you're well informed. I mean, you are well educated on these topics. Nobody for a second would think that you were not, and anybody who has never listened to anything talked about. But just for your own edification, you know, I do tend to nominalism. However, I'm not against Platonic realism, but I think you might have meant Quine's indispensability thesis rather than Gödel's incompleteness theorem. When you're talking about Platonic realism,
the incompleteness is you assume math to use math.
No, that's Quine. That's Quine's. Quine's indispensability thesis was that.
Yes, yeah. I agree. They're both kind of batting around the same.
Okay. Because I mean, I think Quine has a point there as far as, look, if we want to have science and we want to use math, then sure, it makes sense to appeal to Platonic realism. I have no problem with that. Mathematical Platonism is probably the most widely held among mathematicians, because we use them in a way, abstract sets and things of that nature. We use them in a way that makes sense to think of them as something, right, you know, a real, and that's fine. I mean, look, that doesn't necessarily mean there's a third dimension or fourth dimension out there that has triangles and stuff like that. That's not what Platonic realism means. It just means how you treat them as abstract things, you treat them as actual entities, because we use them in a constructive way for science. Okay, I not a bad argument. But I just turned to nominalism because it is simpler. But as far as like what Josh was talking about to begin with, to go back to his initial points. First of all, you know, the PSR is a family of things. There's no one set PSR. It's a whole bunch of different things that could be the principle of sufficient reason. I don't think that the strong principle of sufficient reason makes any sense. It's incoherent unto itself, because it doesn't explain itself. And so not many people I know ever really put forth the strong principle of sufficient reason. Now, for a weak case, that's fine. I don't necessarily think that way. I don't think things have to have a reason. I do tend to brute fact. But your argument, Josh, was that God is some kind of inductive argument to the best explanation. And here's the reason why I don't think that's true. In order to posit a God, right, we, as a best explanation, we have to have experience that we can draw upon, which is the priors. And so, for example, if I'm in a room and I smell smoke and I feel heat, I'm going to have an abductive argument, right, which is just a specialized form of induction, that there's probably a fire somewhere. Doesn't necessarily mean the fire is there. It could be, you know, something completely innocuous, where, you know, just happens to be a hot day. You know, there happens to be like smoke coming from, you know, I don't know, some non-combustible source. But, you know, I have a right to think that, okay, that's probably the best explanation. Is a fire, but it's not something that has to be absolutely certain from the premises. So we have no experience with any kind of deity to make that abductive argument. We have no experience with an external mind outside of a physical body. Not to get to the mind-body problem, but I don't believe that without physical form, without some kind of biological substrate, you can have a mind. I do believe more in what's called property dualism, but that does reduce to non-reductive physicalism as like an emergence thing. But your argument that God is the abductive argument, I cannot substantiate, because how is God the best explanation when all you said was, oh, it gets rid of the infinite regress problem? Which, okay, well, that's not a problem. You can have infinite regress. There's no violation of law or logic. What is that noise? You guys hear that? Oh, it's gone now. That was weird. But there's no problem with the infinite regress. It's just our brains are not wired to understand the infinite, right? We're just biologically hardwired to have the inability to conceptualize infinite things. We can't do it. We just can't do it. We're finite beings. So yes, we have this aversion to infinite regress, but that doesn't mean it's illogical or rational, because there's really only three things, and Josh, I'm going to ask you this directly and you can respond. There's really only three things that can really be the case, right? As far as like the universe. Infinite regress, which means past infinite, which I think you can argue against with the Grim Reaper paradox, but let's assume there's an infinite regress. There's a brute fact, which is some contingent thing that exists from which all things came from, because I believe the universe is contingent. And there's a necessary thing, or a necessary being, which can or cannot be have intelligibility, right? A necessary being can be quantum fluctuation. It doesn't have to be a god. But those are the only three real possibilities. And you're saying, well, the third one is the most likely the case, and it happens to be an intelligent agent, but haven't given any reason why it has to be an intelligent agent. We've never seen an intelligent agent do any of the things that you're suggesting, like create laws of physics. We've never seen any mind ever prescriptively say, oh, I want the speed of light to be this. So why would you make that into an argument that the best abductive argument is a god? And by the way, this all goes to why atheism is rational, just like theism can be rational. And Craig pointed this out explicitly and quite well. Both positions can be rational if you're able to justify them. Doesn't mean by necessity one is right or the other, but I think Jim pointed this out as well. Rational means, are you able to justify it coherently in a way that you can express it to somebody that makes sense? If I said, look, I believe 1 + 1 = 3 because Satan told me. Most people would not believe that's a rational thing, right? Or excuse me, 1 + 1 = 2. If I believe 1 + 1 = 2 because Satan told me, most people are going to say that's probably irrational. I have no justification for that. But if I say 1 + 1 = 2 because I know math and I give all the math reasons, then I say, okay, then you have a justified rational position. So the position of rationality is nothing that is black and white. It is each to individual whether it's rational or not. So you cannot say theism is irrational. You cannot say atheism is irrational. It's the individual making what is rational or not, because that's how we justify our beliefs. So go ahead, Josh.
I think many of the arguments do show that atheism is irrational if they're going to reject God. In your last, you said the necessary being doesn't have to be intelligent. But I gave an argument from this, from the principle of proportionate causality, that the effect cannot be greater than the cause. Whatever is in the effect must be in the cause in some way, virtually, imminently, or some other way. So because the effect, that there's intelligent things in the effect, or it has that final causality inherent in it, there must be something in the cause that gives it that potentiality. For the potentiality and actuality, also gave an argument for change, that things do have potentiality and actuality. I could have been spoken a lot more on many of these various arguments to make the case that I am arguing for an inference to the best explanation. I'm not saying giving an inductive argument based on experience from an empirical data set, but I'm arguing abductively to the best economical explanation that a person could give that takes into account all the data that's there. So I'm not arguing inductively, I'm arguing abductively, because it best explains the data. Theism, it seems to me, has greater explanatory power and greater explanatory scope in that regard. But I didn't give all of the data. And PSR, again, I take the weaker form. But if we're going to be skeptical of our, of the principle that everything has a reason, then we're going to have to be skeptical of our perceptual abilities and even our reasoning abilities. Alexander Proust and Robert Koons even wrote an article about this. I don't know if you've read that. I think it's in the Blackwell Companion, but I think it's a powerful argument that shows the intelligibility, that there must be a reason, a sufficient explanation for everything, and the sufficient explanation for why the universe exists at all, for why there's any change at all, must be God, who is a simple being. Again, I didn't go over that full blown in my opening, but I certainly do think I could do that.
Yeah, Bruce wrote a book with somebody that I know named Josh Rasmussen. I'm sure you're familiar with him.
Yeah.
And matter of fact, Josh had actually said, "Hey, Steve, he sent me a copy of the book, and I read through most of it. I tried to, at least. It's not an easy read. I'm not even gonna front. But you know, he's like, I was hoping he would move you a little bit more toward the God side, like, you know, 55% or something. But yeah, I'm familiar with President's work on that. But here's the thing on that. Again, at first, I personally put abductive arguments as a specialized form of. I realize not everybody does, but to me, inductive just seems to me to be a form of inductive. But you talk about the proportionality aspect. There can be something called a brute fact. I mean, there's something that could be just exist without having any kind of ability to have causation or have actual potentiality into actuality. And so, you know, I believe very strongly that there are things without a cause. There are effects without a cause. We just can't. We cannot determine there's a cause because there's no cause to be had. They don't exist. This is how I look at one of the aspects of quantum mechanics for like local hidden variables that are just proven not to exist. So again, I don't understand how this is an abductive argument. It doesn't make sense to posit a being that has intelligence when you can posit as a naturalistic argument, because we have priors for naturalism, right? I mean, I would think you would agree, Josh, and I'll ask Craig and Jim here in a second. Would you guys agree that even if you have a supernatural belief, that the vast majority of our experiences are natural? And so probabilistically, when we see a phenomenon, the best explanation is probably going to be a naturalistic explanation. Would you not agree with that, Josh? And then I'll ask the rest of the panel. Question, and then we have questions.
If God is a simple being, he's causing those natural causes in the world by what he generally does, how God generally operates.
That's not parsimonious. You're throwing in something that's not required. If we're coming up with a natural nexus explanation for something, if I see a phenomenon,
but what's your explanation for change then? Because I gave an argument for the possibility of change.
All changes is two different states of something that have a difference in time, which is the entropy arrows, right? Arrow of entropy. So if we have an entropic increase in the universe, and there has been something that has changed, we would notice this, right? So we can either look at like time two different ways. We can say, hey, look, there's two particles. They moved away from each other. Or some fundamental aspect of these systems have been differed in a notable way. We can say it's changed, right? That's called reductionism. But there also
how does that occur, though?
Well, what do we consider to be changed? We notice something different between one state and another state. But there's also Platonic realism for time as well, that Craig had mentioned, Platonic realism, where even if they don't change, there is something still called time that takes place. But these are, again, a philosophical question. Does time exist without change? It may. And if it did, why would you need a God anyways? I mean, if time exists independently of change, if it's some kind of actual thing that does exist, you wouldn't need a God, because God couldn't do anything in that case, because he would have to do something in time, which he couldn't do. But anyways, let me ask the panel real quick on this when we get him in here. Then I do have a question.
Well, can I reply to that?
Sure. And then Jim.
Well, those are mere Cambridge properties. It's not a change in God's inherent nature, but it's a change extrinsic to God. Kind of like a person being 5 foot and having a son that grows to be 5'6". It's not the parent that changed. It's the child, and that's an extrinsic change or a Cambridge property.
Go ahead, Jim.
I'll go in reverse order. I'll answer you, Steve. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I thought we were in agreement with this, with believers and non-believers, that a miracle or a supernatural phenomena, as you put it, is by definition the least possible explanation for any occurrence. Even a believer should be able to say, I mean, the resurrection, I think, occurred 0 times, but in the Bible, I can think of 3 off the top of my head. I think maybe 5 times in the Bible there was a resurrection. That's very rare. So if I were to concede that is a supernatural phenomenon, or those 3 to 5 times that it happened in the Bible were supernatural phenomena, well, 3 to 5 times only in the history of humankind, it is still a natural explanation, is still by far the most probable explanation. Let me go back to the top. I've got some. Who's CR? Please forgive me. Who are we talking? Huh?
Craig Reed. Nobody knows who he is.
Okay, from my end, I can only see CR. Okay, so that's
go watch Craig Reed's channel. He does make some really good videos.
Yeah.
All right, so that's Craig. you said new atheist. I don't want to put you on the spot, and I don't want to really hammer this home. But when only believers say new atheist, even new atheists don't call themselves new atheists. It has become a pejorative term. So when you say it,
I use it pejoratively.
when you say it, you risk unintentionally or intentionally painting yourself as hostile or combative, just so you know. Also, you admitted that when you were talking to Drew, he gave an explanation. He gave an explanation for why he's an atheist, and you said, quote unquote, yeah, that seems reasonable. Well, if his atheism seems reasonable at that particular time, you just conceded this entire debate, because at least once in your lifetime, atheism was reasonable to you, therefore it was rational. Yeah. So I think you just conceded the entire debate.
Yeah, because you can't say globally it is then, right?
Last thing, sorry. Yeah, scientism is another Christian buzzword. Only believers say scientism. It might paint you as combative. Okay. If you are implying that, well, see, if you ask 100 people what the definition of scientism, you're going to get 100 different definitions, and they're going to range from comparing us or the scientific method to religion, all the way to some other watered down. Either way, you're going to water down the word science, and you're going to water down the definition of religion to the point where both are completely expendable or meaningless. Last thing, Joshua said the best possible explanation. This ties us right back. We've come full circle now. The best possible explanation is, by definition, a natural explanation. You said using abductive reasoning. I just so happen to have I do a whole thing on my show, a whole mini series on abductive reasoning, and I fully admit it is the most subjective form of reasoning. Subjective to the point where you could get an answer and 9 other people are going to get a completely different answer. It is very subjective. It's personal based. It's empirical. But I will concede one thing. Here's my first concession of the night. The National Academy of Science is 97% atheist. You said that philosophy, a lot of scientists or atheists will dismiss philosophy like it's dead. We don't need it anymore. I totally disagree. Only 64% of philosophers are atheist. There's a rift there. There's a problem there. Philosophy is a form of math, in my opinion. It can be. Those syllogisms are math problems. Those are equations. And if 97% without philosophy, these 97% atheists we would not have opposing viewpoints. I like opposing viewpoints. So if only 64% of all professional philosophers are atheists, that lets me know that maybe philosophy is onto something that science can't actually get without them. That's all I've got.
Yeah, and let me just address something. In philosophy, scientism has understood usage, which is the belief that only acquired knowledge through science. And of course, I disagree with that. I think knowledge can be acquired many different ways. So there's a very standard usage. Now, again, the way the other people are using scientism, and Jim's absolutely right. You ask 100 lay people, they're going to get 100 different answers. I get that. But Craig, you got a lot of background noise. A lot. But in philosophy, there is a pretty well understood usage of the term scientism, which is that epistemologically speaking, you can only acquire knowledge through science, which I think is absolutely absurd. But anyways, but everything else I agree with Jim with. Look, we only have naturalistic phenomenon to draw upon. If unfortunately, let's say something does happen to Jim, people know by now he's putting himself in a very serious position in a couple of years, a couple of months from now, or weeks, whatever it is, by the Ukraine war, and we hope for his safety. But if something does happen to him, and then people say, well, yeah, but it's okay because Jim got resurrected. The chances of people believing that would be pretty slim to none, right? Even Christians who have believe there is resurrection, it's only happened. How many times you say, Jim? 3 times? Unless
3 I can count on top of my head, but I think it's more like 5. You Bible experts know better than me.
And you don't think you're going to be one of the 6? We're all going to die, right? You don't think eventually you're going to be resurrected?
Well, it's more possible for me because I'm a damn superhero.
Okay, fair enough. But there's still the priors we have is these events don't happen. So even if you believe in the supernatural, even if you believe it does happen, they're such of low occurrence to be unjustified to believe without significantly more confirmational evidence. But all right, Greg, go ahead. And I do have a question for the audience that I'm trying to get to.
I got a lot thrown out. What was the first question that you asked, Steve, before I deal with
New atheists was the first thing.
Yeah, I use that term pejoratively. I admit that, but go ahead.
Yo, I was quoting Steve. I said Steve McRae says trademark new atheist. I wasn't calling. I call them debate me bros.
Yeah,
and it's a type of atheist.
Well, he just used it. He admitted to using it pejoratively,
Sure.
which proves my point. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
don't deny that.
Generally as a pejorative.
Yeah.
But the what was the question you originally asked, Steve? Before
about abductive
Josh
arguments. About
supernatural is by definition the least probable explanation.
No, that's
low
something
priors.
you said. He asked a question that started this off, and then Josh spoke, and then you spoke, and then the question is gone.
Oh yeah, what was that's a good point. What was the question?
We were talking about being a supernatural event being the least possible.
That was the question, right? Yeah. I mean, if we see something,
okay, so
naturalism is more abductively the case.
Okay, so what I was going to say, yes, obviously a supernatural event is by definition. This is also the limitations of evidentiary school of apologetics, because by definition, supernatural means what? Outside the purview of empirical investigation. To some degree, it's outside the realm of the natural world. So yeah, a supernatural event is going to be the least likely occurrence. That's given. It's a miracle. It can't happen. It's a miracle. Where I started realizing that the presuppers were onto something, and actually, you said I took the middle position. The debate is, are atheists irrational? And I hedged. I said yes and no. So I wasn't trying to win the debate and say atheists are, because I don't think they always are. I think it's exactly what I was saying. Sometimes atheists come up. I pre-qualified my description of Drew and the philosophical atheists, the guys from England, with here are some examples of atheists who are eminently reasonable, and here's why I think they're reasonable. Because if the choice were binary between Drew's like weird type of Christianity and atheism, it is the more honest position of those two poles, because you don't have things that you have to believe that aren't blatantly false, like the Earth being 6,000 years old.
Okay.
So I actually ceded the point to you guys, and then I got accused of losing the debate.
Well, I mean, but that's the whole point, though. I mean, that's what Jim is trying to argue to you, though, that there's no possible way you can say by fiat as a whole, the belief that God does not exist or the belief that God does exist are irrational, because it doesn't make sense to do that. I mean, it would only make sense. It's very specific. It would only make sense possibly in a very specific instance. For example, if Jim were to tell me he believes A does not equal A, there's not much he can do to justify that. I'm going to think he's irrational across the board. I really don't know what a justification would be. Although there is a person out there in the atheist community who doesn't accept A equals A ontologically, which I don't understand their argument, because they're adding in a temporal component that doesn't exist, and they're just out to frickin' lunch, and I think they're irrational. So there are certain things that, yes, you can say this belief by fiat is irrational, maybe, with a priori knowledge, but this is not the case.
But okay, so the thing I wanted to get to is, when you were talking about, like, for example, belief in a resurrection, what you have to examine, because it is not irrational to believe in a resurrection if you already have the prior commitment that God is omnipotent, or at least awesomely powerful. I don't think that's the discussion.
I don't think it's irrational to have supernatural beliefs, and I don't think it's irrational to believe Christ rose from the dead. That has nothing to do with rationality if you can justify it.
Right. Well, okay, so the on the atheist side, you have people who believe, and depending on how resolutely with qualifiers, that the supernatural occurrences do not happen. Now, depending on how resolute, there's a lot of atheists who qualifiers, they might believe in ghosts, they might believe in something that is supernatural by definition, and you go, isn't that inconsistent with atheism? And actually, yeah, it kind of is. It's something supernatural that's outside of the purview of empirical investigation that they kind of believe. So,
well, wait. It's consistent. It's consistent with atheism, but doesn't entail atheism. You agree with that, right? I could say, look, gods don't exist, but I believe in spiritual entities that exist, or life continues.
Right. Yeah, it can be consistent. Exactly. What it all boils down to is the nub of the conversation is that if you have robust, defensible justifications for your position, even if it's mistaken, if you have robust defensible justifications for your position, then it is a reasonable position.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Again, and there might be somebody can make an argument. They've been convinced A equals A because of brainwashing. So them it's rational, maybe, or A doesn't equal A, maybe. But as a whole, for a rational agent, and when I'm using terms, I assume rationality. I assume a rational agent, not something that's been brainwashed, not somebody of altered states. I don't know how a rational agent can ever not agree that A equals A. It doesn't make any sense to me. But let me ask you this question from the audience, because it's gotten pretty far, and I want to like. It's a good question. Somebody had to ask.
Well, I had a couple of rejoinders before we get to the question and answer.
Sure.
If that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it seems to me, Steve, going back to your first and then your second, that if you still say it's a brute fact, why do people in the atheist community only say it's a brute fact when they see the obvious theistic implications? Why not say it's a brute fact when you have something, a normal historical event, or brute fact for an everyday thing that happens in life? It seems conspicuous that the atheist only forwards the brute fact hypothesis when it appears to have theistic implications. If you're going to say the reason why the universe exists, or the reason why the beginning of the universe has theistic implications, why is that?
Yeah, I don't know what it has to do with atheism. This is epistemology, what you're talking about. It has nothing to do with atheism.
It would show atheism is unintelligible.
No, it has nothing to do with atheism. Brute fact means that we believe, or I personally hold, in general, not absolutely. It's not like something that I claim as knowledge. But I hold that there are just things outside our epistemic limits. There are things that we cannot know. Matter of fact, even Craig has mentioned Gould's incompleteness theorem. There are things out there that are true that can never be proven true in any Turing complete system. We can never prove them to be true. Cannot be done. But there's also, at the same token, facts that we may not know, that we can never know. They're just beyond our comprehension. They're outside our inability to understand. They're called brute facts, meaning they don't satisfy PSR, because I don't accept PSR anyways. But we just have the inability, or right now don't have any way of figuring out one way or another.
Yeah, so we don't know.
Right? So we don't know. Right? We don't know. It's unknown. So we call that a brute fact. I have no problem with that. It has nothing to do with atheism, though. It has to do with epistemological understandings.
But the argument.
Hang on, let me finish. We are contingent beings, correct? The universe is contingent. I think you accept that, right?
Yes.
So contingency either comes from contingent things or from necessary things. There are no other options, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So the theist is, I think, it has to like accept a necessary thing. They generally posit God as a necessary being. Not always. Swinburne will make an argument basically God being a contingent type being, but he does it very nuanced, as you guys know. But I think you guys would probably say God is somehow necessary, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But there might be some contingent thing out there that we just don't understand. That is the brute fact. And that's perfectly fine with me. It's just an epistemic unknown. And I think that it is the fact that we recognize our inability to apprehend or understand things that might be outside our limits, rather than fill it in with some kind of God gaps and say, well, it must be some kind of God, because it doesn't follow from that.
When we see an event or something, and if we postulate that event occurred without a cause or without an explanation, now that seems to be tantamount to magic. It's because I gave an argument for why the intelligibility of the universe, if we're going to have intelligent causes here and now, then the reason why the universe exists has to have an intelligent reason. If we're going to do without the intelligibility for why the universe exists, I just find it very convenient for why you don't say everything and anything is a brute fact. I mean, David Hume saw the implications of denying causality. He said anything can be the cause of anything. That seems absurd. If you're going to believe in causation and it seems to me that if we're going to be rational and seek after explanations, then you're going to be a theist, it seems to me.
But again, causation can be from two other things: an infinite regressive causation, which is not illogical, or from a contingent thing for causation. By the way, I don't accept a causal chain. I don't accept that there are things that must have a causation. There are events that happen in quantum mechanics quite frequently that it has no cause for. There are no causal chains. There is no regress on that, because there's just no information in that system prior to the event. So it's not even something we just don't know about. There is nothing to be known. I consider that an uncaused cause.
I have a question about quantum mechanics. Does quantum mechanics operate according to laws? Because I think there are such things as quantum mechanical laws.
I think so too.
But sometimes they violate.
Don't they have an explanation?
Well, sure.
Sometimes
Well, they
violate
might.
the
I
laws
mean,
of
again,
physics. What Steve is saying, and he's right, is that sometimes the reason why people say quantum mechanics is so trippy, two reasons. First of all, if you presuppose physicalism, it's inconsistent. That's an argument I make on my videos. But the second reason is, like quantum tunneling and what he mentioned, there are some trippy aspects of quantum mechanics that seem to actually violate the laws of physics, period, like entanglement.
Yeah, well, and again, these
information.
But Craig, these are things that we learn as we go, right? I mean, quantum mechanics is into a completely different, realm of physics, right? So when we started with the Newtonian physics, we thought, hey, look, there are people believe that we can never go more than 120 miles an hour in a train or the body would implode, right? So
and then we have the speed of light.
Right. And so when Einstein came around and he completely redeveloped our understanding of gravity in a consistent way that modeled it in accordance to our observations and predictability, it didn't negate, by the way, it didn't falsify Newtonian. It just said, hey, look, this is insufficient to describe certain things. It's great for certain things, right? Just because,
well, it puts qualifiers. For example, with entanglement, it in principle, it can seem like information is traveling faster than the speed of light
at a
because
distance.
two entangled parts.
Yes, but in actuality, it really doesn't. You can't get any usable
all
information.
I'm saying is it takes a lot of. I'm agreeing with your original premise. That's why I don't think the Kalam is a great argument, because in principle there could be uncaused causes, and there's a whole series of lectures on Carlo Velli outside the causal chain.
Yeah,
to be quite honest, I don't fully understand.
Yeah, and
I just want to clarify.
Sure.
I just want to clarify my. I'm not just using the Kalam. I'm also using the why anything at all exists. I'm also using the Aristotelian argument.
But that's fine. But we have no explanation of why something exists over nothing. You're just hypothesizing there's a being that by necessity must exist for that case, which again the atheist is going to deny because they have reasons to believe that they have active reasons to say that this particular God more likely does not exist. Matter of fact, Jim brought up an interesting point earlier. But when you go back to the Kalam, whether the universe has a beginning or not is irrelevant. I personally am fine with the universe have a beginning. I had a discussion with Krauss on this very thing using Hawking's no boundary proposal to model using negative time to go back to t = 0, which Jim was talking about. And he's absolutely right on this. By the way, Jim got some physics right. Oh, yay! He gives a gold star. He's so happy about that. He's been talking about these discussions, so I'm familiar with this. But yeah, it makes no sense to say what happened before t = 0. It's a nonsensical question. And so, sure, it had a beginning, but what does it mean to have a beginning in the aspect of in some kind of infinite linear time? It doesn't. It's like sure, you can have a ray. A ray has a point that has a beginning, but a point has zero dimensionality to it. And then you have a line that goes off into infinity, but it still has zero dimensionality to begin with. And so I don't have a problem with I don't have a problem with a beginning of the universe as with respect to something like that. But it's not with a beginning with any kind of some kind of timeline where God exists prior. That makes no sense. I don't know what that would mean prior to the universe existing, because time didn't exist prior to the universe existing.
You're right. It may not make sense. It might. That's why I don't rely or put all of my eggs in that basket, on the Kalam basket. I think the Kalam is a good argument, but not conclusive. I think it's a signpost, but the beginning of the universe does imply theistic implications. And you've had all these models try to, avert the hypothesis of the expanding universe by George Lemaitre. You've had the oscillating model.
Hang on, I don't mean to interrupt you, but Craig, can you mute when you're not talking, because it's a lot of background noise and people are noticing. My apologies. Yeah, go ahead. So Lemaitre expanding universe, which by the way we know it is, and we know it's accelerating. Sure.
Well, you've had all I'm saying is you've had a lot of different models try to, supersede, sometimes just try to debunk the Big Bang, and in the Big Bang, the standard Big Bang model is still alive and well. But I think there's other arguments. I don't think that there was anything temporal before the Big Bang, but ontologically before the Big Bang. There must be a reason why the universe came into existence at the Big Bang, rather than just out of nothing, nothing comes. Because if you deny that,
we don't know that.
That's magic.
No, that's an unknown. That trope has been long since shown to be something we cannot make any confirmative statement on, because out of nothing, nothing comes. It's just people think that, but we have no way to determine that. We have never experienced nothing. We don't even know the properties of nothing. If nothing does exist, I hate to say it as a pun, but there's nothing to prevent anything from potential to actual. There's no potential. There's no actual. We don't know what the hell nothing would even have. We don't know if things can come from it. We don't know if things can't. We don't know what anything means with respect to nothing, because there is no actuality. There is no potentiality. There's no properties. There's nothing. Let me get a question in real quick.
You're talking.
I got to get this question because it's been on the table for a while, and people have been nice enough to ask questions. So let me just get this out there and we go back to the topic. When somebody asked a question, a religious belief system. Ask them how many religions are incorrect, and get a specific number. And they want a percentage. So how many religions do you think are correct? Because if gods exist, most of them are going to be wrong. As a matter of fact, almost all of them, but one probably is wrong if you're going to look at every little nuance, because no two religions are exactly alike. So they've got some facts in the matter incorrect. Would you agree that religion in itself, nobody has all the facts, because you got two Christians in a room, they can't even agree. So how many religions would you say are incorrect as opposed to all the ones that exist? Let's say there's 40,000 plus religions. How many of them would you say are correct, or none of them? And then you don't believe in religion.
You want to go first, Craig?
From the audience?
Yeah, it's from the audience. Yeah, Craig, that's a good question for you.
Well, it's kind of a misleading question that atheists ask all the time, because if you take Theology Unleashed and Thought Adventure podcast and myself, the subtleties and the specific personal deities, there are cultural differences for sure, and there's differences that you can chisel down to personal belief, but the ontology of what we believe is virtually identical. If you ask Ariuna, what is Christian to you, he'll give you basically a version of classical theism, omnipotent, all-loving, all-good. He'll tell you something who's identical to me. Same thing with the Thought Adventure podcast. Now, when you listen to them too much, they start sentencing everybody to hell too for different reasons. But when they make their arguments, they do. It's really weird, because they're really reasonable.
They start sentencing people to hell for different reasons.
They do. They start going like, hell is going to get you. But their ontology of what they believe is virtually identical. They might not agree with that, but it's the truth. It's the, omnipotent. It's virtually identical. So it's a misleading question. A lot of these, how I describe religion, it is the ritualization of the ineffable, the unspeakable, the hard to put into words. And yeah, we can disagree about the text, but the subtext often is virtually identical. And if you examine it past, like, a Mormon believes X because he puts on underwear and he makes spells or something, I don't know the specifics. They believe in an ontology that's very similar. So,
I get that. But the question is, though, if you're looking at all the myopic detail of religions, there can only be one. There really can only be one true religion. If you look, because if you have two things and they're very, very similar, so they have the core doctrine is they believe Christ existed. Okay, I would say that's the foundation for Christianity. It's that Christ did exist. I don't see how you could not have that. We're not talking about atheist Christianity, which does exist, by the way, which just adheres to the Christ teachings, whether he existed or not. But
right. I want her on my channel.
Yeah, but theistic Christianity believes there actually was a person named Christ, and I think most non-mythicists would accept that. Most historians do. Most biblical experts do. But as far as the other aspects of these religions, they get stuff wrong. Correct?
Right. Well, again, there's two ways of parsing it out. The generic omni-property God, okay, which almost all religions have some sort of claim to and agree in principle on. If you look at perennial philosophy, that's the entire premise, that all religions do agree and all religions are in principle one. And if you look at like a Buddhist philosopher or a Trappist monk who goes hides in a monastery for 6 years and writes a book, it's virtually identical to St. John of the Cross. A lot of things they say overlap. A lot of the claims overlap. When you narrow it down to specifics, yeah, obviously you can't believe Jesus Christ rose from the dead, hallelujah, only Son of God, and be a Muslim at the same time. But the ontology is often overlapping and identical, and there are overlapping truth claims within almost all religions. Take like humility. Buddhism says humility is a virtue. Christianity says it's a virtue.
Virtue ethics.
Taoism says it's a virtue. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, no, and I'm fine with virtues. But let me ask Jim. Jim, would you agree with me on this, that if he's admitting that, look, sure, all the religions can't be right. Matter of fact, most of them have to be wrong. I mean, it's just a matter of percentages. It's a matter of, look, they have all these different claims. They're contradicting of themselves. They're if you have two religions, look, Muslims, Islam, and Catholicism are non-compatible. I think we all agree upon that, right? So as a non-believer, not even necessarily an atheist, but as a non-believer, right, an atheist or an agnostic, why would we say, look, what you're telling us, even the core things, we still don't know what religion to go to. We have no idea how to practice this. The amount of the liturgy that's involved, we would get wrong because we'd have no idea what the hell this God wants. We're going to get it wrong anyways because they're all wrong.
The estimate is 41,000 sub-denominations on Earth of active religion, 41,000. But I think a better number to kind of play with in our heads is 300 active major religions.
And that's still a lot. That's still a lot.
Right. And my best estimate, I've crunched the numbers. The most that could be correct at the same time out of those 300 major ones is maybe 50, and that's pushing it.
So let me ask Josh, because it is about atheism being illogical. Irrational. Look, would you agree that when it comes to evidence is what changes the likelihood of a hypothesis or proposition to be true or false? And there's evidence for God, there's evidence against God, and what people need to do is they weigh both and they say, look, I'm either stuck somewhere in the middle, or I think that the probability is less likely, and I say, look, there are no gods, or the probability is greater, and there is a God, and then trying to figure out what the hell that God wants, you go from there. But people that study these things and look at these arguments, and they do have a rational position to say, look, I've looked at the logical problem of evil, evidential problem of evil, find hiddenness, argument for silence, all these arguments say, look, it's far more likely that there is a God, especially when it comes to appeal to naturalism or to appeal to theoretical virtues, which was Oppe's argument. If a person has well-researched this, read these articles, read these papers, read these books by Mackey, Oppe, even Draper has arguments for theism, right, and against theism. So if you read these things, and the atheist goes, look, I think the probability, there's evidence for God. Anybody says there's no evidence for God, it's just, I think they're not even in the realm of having a conversation with. But it doesn't mean it's strong evidence. It can be very, 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 very weak evidence at best. And you just say, look, it's so weak to be, it's so weak to be not even, really have any consideration. That's fine. But would you agree that an atheist who actually knows about these topics, who says, look, there are no gods, and here are my reasons for it, how is that not rational? And then we'll let Jim go.
I think they are rational people, but their conclusions, how they get there, is illogical. I talked with Graham Oppe. He talks a lot about explanation. So
I've talked to him too.
Yeah, and that's why I try to use abduction, and said that to him, that the common sense, and that's why I kept bringing up Thomas Reid. The common sense, the dictates of common sense, is a simpler explanation than being skeptical of those things. So we come to the table and we think it's on an even balance. You can weigh the arguments for and against, but when you step back and look at this issue, which I know a lot of them have. I have too. I've been studying this for almost 25 years, and when I look at the evidence, there's a lot of background things, commitments, presuppositions, and so forth that they take for granted. So before we do a calculus of what's more probable and according to what, well, there are things that tip the scale for theism overwhelmingly. So I think the background probability is extremely high for theism over atheism.
And they would find the exact opposite. But you say it's illogical. What is illogical about it? Look, theism is not illogical. Illogical is a contradiction. If you posit a God that exists and doesn't exist at the same time, then sure, your theism is illogical. But just having a belief in a being that exists, not illogical. Having a belief that that being does not exist, not illogical. Them themselves are not illogical. Illogical means it doesn't follow from some kind of rule of inference, like a non sequitur, or formal logical fallacy, or contradiction. These are things that are not logical. I don't know how atheism could possibly fall into that category, but we do need to get to Jim because he's been wanting to add some stuff.
Well, just let me say, I think the arguments that I gave and are from Thomas Aquinas. He would say that they are demonstrations. So I think they demonstrate the existence of God. And if God does exist, atheism is false. And for not accepting the conclusions, it's illogical.
Well, Aquinas' 5 ways were meant to actually keep the believers believing. Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways were not ever meant to convert the non-believer. That's not what it was for. So they're not, sure, they're interesting arguments, but they don't. If you ran Aquinas' 5 ways to the average atheist who says, "Look, there are no gods," and they are educated in philosophy. We're not talking about the debate me bros, as Greg would say. But the educated atheist out there, they'd be like, yeah, these are non-convincing to an atheist because they're not strong arguments. They're just
most of them take analytic philosophy. They're not.
I understand that. I happen to like
attuned in classical philosophy.
But that's it's still irrelevant. Aquinas is like antiquated to say the least, especially knowing with modern.
I think
physics.
It's funny how people think he's antiquated or outdated. Nowhere could be more untrue. Here's the book, the one and the many. I have a lot of Ed Feser's books. I think they're good arguments that you can make from a classical position. I used to think that William Lane Craig's Kalam was the end all of arguments. I think it's okay. I think a lot better arguments are from Thomas Aquinas, and I think those do demonstrate the existence of God.
Jim, are you convinced by Aquinas' 5 ways?
Well, full disclosure, I haven't read him since high school, literally. So maybe freshman philosophy 101, maybe, I don't know. So I'm not real familiar. I'm going to gish gallop you guys just real quick. Just please indulge me. And don't feel like you need to respond to all this. It's just that I write this stuff down and then I'm just going to shotgun you in the face a little bit. Okay. First thing, the atheist believes ... When you say the atheist believes, it's the refusal to use atheists as a plural. That's another buzzword. That's another giveaway that only believers do. I'm not saying don't use it. I'm just saying when you do it, you're identifying yourself at whether unknowingly or not, that you're going to be hostile or combative. You never hear a non-believer saying the Christian believes that. No, but we say Christians in general believe. We talk like normal humans. The atheist believes. Quantum physics is in its infancy. You can't compare it to classical physics. Yes, it has been around since the 1920s. I get it. But I mean, quantum physics, just start where the Higgs field was discovered and go from there. It is fast moving. It's the Wild West compared to classical physics. You can't expect them to have all the answers yet. Yes, Joshua, there are laws around this, but they are descriptive. They're not prescriptive, same as classical physics. We thought quantum entanglement. I'm gonna level with you guys. Here's my second admission of the night. Quantum entanglement is a very good argument for the existence of a supernatural deity or an intelligent agent. Spooky action at a distance blows my noodle, but it might not blow my grandkids' noodle. And for me to just throw my hands up and say there is a God is just kind of giving up, in my opinion. All right, next thing. This is for Craig. Steve, I suck at syllogisms, but I kind of jotted one down. So tell me if this is logical or at least sound. Proposition 1. Craig believes that Drew's explanation for atheism is reasonable. Proposition 2, at least one explanation for atheism is reasonable and rational in Craig's view, in Craig's worldview. Worldview is another buzzword. I hardly ever use it. Proposition 3, atheism therefore can be rational. Conclusion, to say that atheism is irrational is incorrect, and we've won the debate.
I don't have a problem with that syllogism. I mean, it makes sense.
And the last thing.
Sure.
The last thing, Joshua talked about logic. Like on my show, I told you my little mini series I'm doing. It's like a Sherlock scan where we look at a photo and we use abductive reasoning. And we say at the top of every show, there is deduction, there's induction, and there's abduction. Abduction is by definition the least accurate, and it is definitely not a pillar to base your assertion that atheism is irrational. It is by definition the least accurate form of logic. Okay, that's all.
And I agree with that. I will say one thing though. You had mentioned, and I didn't get to it before, but you reminded me of it. I don't think induction is subjective. Actually, I think quite the opposite. Because with a good, strong, cogent, inductive argument, two people will come to the same conclusion. If it's strong and cogent, they have to come to the same conclusion. It doesn't mean that's guaranteed, but if they use the inductive method, to say, here's my premises, I'm using the inductive method, my conclusion doesn't necessarily follow, but is more likely the case based upon the premises, it would be objective to all people looking at that inductive inference. So I don't think inductive is subjective at all. Arbitrary is a different story, but yeah, I know, I agree with you. Abductive reasoning seems to be the least powerful out of all of them. I do, again, consider it a form of inductive reasoning. But, deductive reason doesn't give you any more information, right? A deductive argument just kind of rearranges what you know and kind of reformalizes it, but it doesn't give you anything really new of any substance. Inductive arguments do, right? Because you're saying, hey, look, this is what I think is more likely the case based upon this. It's not guaranteed, but you're acquiring new knowledge based upon information that you have prior, and you kind of saying, hey, because if I know this, I can draw an inference giving you more knowledge, or at least at that point, information. I wouldn't consider it knowledge unless you can demonstrate it true or it is true. But it's still, you're getting more information from induction than you are deduction. Abduction, you're not really getting any information from. You're just making a conclusion that you think is the best explanation, but it's just an educated guess at that point, for a best explanation. But anyway,
the argument that I
go ahead.
The argument that I gave for a deduct, I gave some deductive ones, and the inference to the best explanation I use abductively, but the deductive ones were based on premises that were empirical, that change occurs, and commonsensical. So it's obvious that change occurs, and theism provides an explanation for change.
But does it?
That things
that literally is God of the gap saying God done cause the change rather than a naturalistic explanation. Yeah, sure, we all agree change happens.
It gives the possibility for change.
So what? There's bare possibilities all kinds of places.
What you said is, I believe what you said in response to me about things have potentiality and actuality. And let me see if I get this right. Did you say things function according to laws?
I believe there's nomological laws. Where those laws came from or how they come about is a mystery. Again, brute fact. If there's a being that can
what
change...
explains?
Hang on.
But you don't.
But hang on. If there's a being that can change these nomological laws, if it's a being that exists that says, look, I want the speed of light to be this, vice this, yeah, I'm going to call that a god. I got no issue with that. But there's no indication of that for even an abductive argument. I mean, there's just nothing.
The reason that there's anything at all existing right here and now, not at the Big Bang, but right here and now, and why anything at all keeps existing, is something has to combine the particles and things for why things keep existing.
Now you're getting into Sijuwati's territory.
I think that's a good argument for God.
You do realize that was Dr. Sijuwati's argument that we had on before, that God is actually the mechanism by which the causal relationships occur. That's actually his thesis. Which, by the way, somebody had said that, it was funny because somebody had actually made a comment that I had Dr. Sijuwati on, and just kind of looking smart. I actually wrote a pretty good paragraph to Dr. Sijuwati, Sijuwati. And he responded to it as, hey, look, somebody else actually brought up this objection before. Here was my answer. So, it takes a little bit of understanding to understand these types of complexity conversations, but doesn't necessarily make Sijuwati or what you just said true. It doesn't mean that you have to have a god to have some kind of causal glue that holds these types of supervenience levels of orality together, as Dr. Sijuwati would claim. You're just positing that, which, by the way, I don't think is parsimonious, and I agree with Jim on this. We only have natural explanations to really draw upon as far as a priorities. So why would you abductively have an inference to something that we do not experience very often, if at all, as far as an explanation, when we have natural explanations that are probably more likely? Whether we know that an actual explanation or not, it still seems to me, if some occurrence happens, whether it's the universe or something within the universe, because I do think there are difference between the universe as a whole, treating it as the parts, because then you have the fallacy of composition. But generally speaking, we only see naturalistic events. So why would you not want to more likely posit some naturalistic event rather than a supernatural event? That doesn't seem parsimonious to me. And I think Jim would agree on that as an atheist, right?
When we look at, when we use our observation as Immanuel Kant, we see things through a conceptual framework that has meaning. That we don't see things simply as they are, but as a conceptual framework, as both form and matter. Now, there must be something that combines that form and matter and that keeps it combined rather than just, being total chaos and going apart. The argument for why change occurs and why anything at all exists and why anything at all exists right here and now, there must be an explanation that is both that is a rational explanation, that is its own reason for why anything at all exists.
Are you an idealist?
So if you, people have had different
Christian idealist.
Can you define that?
A Christian idealist.
I think
that the physical realm that physical realm can be changed by mental states. That what we experience is not necessarily reality in itself, but minds are something that has an impact on reality, or within the mind of God itself, like monastic idealism.
Yeah, I think God is an.
Yeah.
I think God is an embodied mind. In one of my debates with, I think it was counter apologist, I said, I said God, I said, what's objective, I said, it exists outside finite minds. I think I messed that up a little bit, but I think God is the ase, that he is the sole thing that exists necessarily, and anything that else exists gets its existence from God. It depends on God. And so y'all mentioned the Platonic realm of numbers and so forth. A much simpler explanation would be that those numbers and ideas reside in the mind of God.
That's a transcendental argument.
Well, I think it's a good argument.
Well, no, and I'll give you this. I'll grant you this. There are some things that the theists might have a slight advantage to on face value, even. And look, I don't think it's a good argument, though. Look, I get the idea that these numbers exist somewhere. They're conceptual ideas that must exist because they're necessary. I do believe that they are priority necessary things. But to say that you have to have a mind that exists that's necessary to always apprehend these things, or always have them, makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Right.
Because I exist. I know A equals A. If I die tomorrow, which I'm sure a lot of people would be thrilled that would be happening, but if I did die tomorrow, A equals A doesn't cease to be the case. Even if God doesn't exist, A equals A doesn't cease to be the case. Now, I understand with the tag argument, if A proceeds, if A is necessary for B and B exists, then A must exist, right? Because it's just a transcendental argument. But I don't think you have to have A to have B in this particular case, because B, for a necessary being, such as A equal A would be a necessary being to me, it doesn't require any apprehension of that. It doesn't matter if you have a consciousness kind of mind that came up with it or not. It still exists in this possible world and all possible worlds as necessity.
It exists in the mind of God necessarily. So
why?
Numbers.
That doesn't follow. No, that doesn't follow.
So do you think they exist in a Platonic third realm?
No, first of all, I'm a nominalist. So, but I have no problem with Platonic realm.
Are you really anomalous? Are you really anomalous when do you live your life like a nominalist?
Are you a mathematical nominalist, Steve, or are you more of a Platonic?
I have no problem with mathematical nominalism. I think mathematical nominalism probably is the case for the most part. If you want to really be effectually use mathematics and science, I think I'm fine with mathematical nominalism. I assume mathematical Platonic realism from mathematics, mathematical realism. I have no problem with that. Okay. But I don't accept like Platonic forms.
How are you with this definition of nominalism? That you are dipping your toe into the transcendent realm to tiny and varying degrees with pre-qualifiers and preconditions in certain circumstances and ascribing reality.
Yeah, I don't have an issue with that. Definition? Yeah, because you have to. There are transcendental things. I mean, numbers can be transcendental, right. So I have no problem with that. Yeah,
so that's why.
I don't think any mathematician wouldn't. But if there are one out there, let me know. Right. But I don't think that they would.
Right. Yeah. So
I'm sorry.
What I agree with you in principle that this is why I'm not crazy about the transcendental arguments, but I think they're actually really robust and strong. But they push the needle too far. you can't get to transcendent God, but you can study transcendent categories and come to
I agree.
conclusions.
No, look, Craig, and I want to get Jim back into this. I'm absolutely fine with transcendental arguments. But again, like you said, I can't get that to be like the mind of God. If I say, in order for my car to exist, it has to have engine, wheels, and all these other things, right? So if the car exists, those wheels and engines exist, right? Because they're necessary precursors for a car to exist. And that's probably a crappy explanation. But if something exists and it requires something else to be, if it exists, then transcendentally we can say that the precursor exists. That's all a transcendental argument is. Nothing wrong with those.
Right, but also you think the laws of logic exist, right?
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Okay, and they are invisible, immaterial, and transcendent, correct?
Yeah, I mean, but it doesn't mean that you have to have a mind to apprehend them or to keep them going, like a theistic personalism.
I don't think the transcendental arguments get you there yet, but I think they're the building blocks for actually potentially really good arguments, as long as you keep to the steps that an agnostic or an atheist would agree with and go, yes, I agree with that. Yes, I agree.
Yeah, well, I think both parties make a mistake. I think that the theist takes it too far and the atheist doesn't take it far enough. They don't meet in the middle somewhere. Because an atheist who just by fiat ignores transcendental arguments, it doesn't know what a transcendental argument is, I think. Right? But as you pointed out, it can only get you so far. And if it gets you to mathematical Platonism, great. Like I said, I think Aquinas makes some very good points. And I think most mathematicians, whether they actively are aware of it or not, probably do treat mathematics in a form of realism in order to set theory.
Right. Well, Aquinas said he became a reluctant Platonist.
Yeah.
Based off of the what's it called, the irrepressibility method?
Indispensability thesis.
Indispensability, yes.
Yeah,
See, now William Lane Craig uses that argument to try and make it an argument for God. Instead
I think that goes too far. Yeah, it goes too far.
Yeah, and just study the argument and take it where it gets you. Right?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Josh, and then, like I said, Jim.
Well, I was just going to say William Lane Craig, I think he's a nominalist when it comes to mathematical objects, but they always work. And laws of logic, they always apply. Geometry always applies. So I think
clarification, Josh. They only apply in classical logic. There are logics out there that do not have logs to the middle, right? And law of non-contradiction. There are paraconsistent and diatheistic logics that can have true contradictions without principle of explosion. So we were talking about classical logic. Yeah, absolutely right. But for the audience out there, not everybody has to adhere to classical logic. There are other forms of logic that the laws of logic don't apply. The only one that I think that's consistent of all of them is the law of identity. I don't know how you can get around the law of identity. That to me is most fundamental. I think Aristotle, actually, if I'm not mistaken, that's the only one he really fully agreed with. But I could be wrong on that.
Okay. Well, I think how they apply to reality, if we're going to be a realist, then they must exist somewhere. And it's, like I said, it's simpler to, instead of having them exist in a Platonic third realm where they're causally effete and can't cause anything, have them exist in the mind of God. It's a much more simpler
that's a form of idealism, right? I mean, Jim, look, would you...
But there's also other things like goodness, truth, causality.
Yeah, I get that, but oneness. I've gone a little too far here, but Jim, look, would you agree that these mathematical things, right? Okay, look, how about this? Dreams exist in some capacity. I would say, do they have ontology? Do they have any kind of causal ability? Do they have kind of anything to act upon anything? No, they're inert. They're causally inert. Dreams are causally inert. But we talk about them as if they are something real. If you want to look at dreams from a realism point of view, we say, I had a dream last night. It is something that happened. It was something that occurred. There was a real event. Was the dream real? Well, it doesn't mean that it was something that actually happened in reality, but we talk about the dream as an actual thing, right? We talk about it in a way that means we had something happen to us in a way that makes sense conversationally. That's how math works. That's all it is. Yeah. When we talk about sets, we talk about these laws of logic, we talk about these numbers, the mathematical realist, or even so far as a Platonist, would just say this is how we're expressing these types of things, and they might exist. Like the dreams don't exist in the mind, right? You cannot have a dream without a mind. So yeah, it might exist in some kind of realm that we just aren't aware of. Whatever that is, doesn't necessarily mean some kind of spatial thing, but in an abstract realm, numbers exist in an abstract realm, right? They're abstract. They don't have to have any kind of ontological realm where they actually physically exist, but we treat them as if they exist. The number two exists, right? Yeah, go ahead.
Right. Now I forgot what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, sorry, I've been
related to that.
ignoring the live chat. Sorry, guys.
So you would say, oh man, now I totally forgot.
It's okay. We're all four involved in this. By the way, this is
okay. So
it's an ongoing discussion between the four of us.
To some degree, mathematical with qualifiers and preconditions to mathematical axioms do exist. Okay, and they are the preconditions of intelligibility to some degree,
Yes,
because you can't do signs without.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, so that's as far as the transcendental argument takes. That's where it stops.
Yeah. Well, hang on. Let's before we go too far, Jim. Would you agree with that? Would you agree that the transcendental at least gets you that far?
Yes, I have one point of contention to what you said, though,
yes.
Steve. You were speaking
I can't kick you
about
out, by the way.
Say again.
I said if you disagree with me, I can't kick you out. Just kidding. Dumpster fire.
Burn me once, shame on you. Burn me twice, shame on me. Okay, I'm so sorry.
Welcome to the dumpster fire part of the show.
See, I knew it was going to devolve. You spoke about a mind. You referred to the mind as if it was some sort of. Let me get through all my thoughts, and then you guys can respond. I got four things here. You respond to you refer to a mind as if it's something magical that exists outside of the normal working processes, electrochemical processes of your brain. I have a contention with that.
Wait, I did? I did or he did?
You did.
No, I don't. I don't think
you spoke of mind as it was something outside of the normal processes.
No, I said the mind can't exist independently without a physical substrate. I'm a property. It
sounded a little magical to me. People have this dualistic idea of the mind and the brain being separate.
Yeah,
that wasn't me. Okay. Joshua was speaking about dreams, thoughts, and also goodness. Even math, the laws of science, logic, all of these they do exist, but they are byproducts of this little 3.5 pound wet wired hard drive we have inside our skull. Nothing more, nothing less. In 10 or 20 years, we're going to be able to map every dream electrochemically. We're going to be able to play it on a damn screen. There's nothing magical about it. Now, let me get through all these. So these are prescriptive, not descriptive. If you're talking about a God claim, that would be a prescriptive. That's we get that confused. And my final thing is, and it does segue. I'm going to take you for a little walk here, but I'll bring you right back home. Steve said a natural explanation is just by fiat better than a supernatural one. We forget about, Steve and I, and some non-believers or agnostics, often forget about the prime motivator of believers. And we always dismiss it or we forget about it, is personal experiences. And you guys have talked a lot about Bill Craig just now. Say what you will about him, but the guy really believes, and he's at least intellectually honest. And he was once posited, if it were found out that all this was just bull hockey, would you still believe? And he says, absolutely, I would, based on my own personal experiences. That is a good, intellectually honest statement. Unlike Frank Turek, who I've had 2 conversations with in the past, and it's the exact opposite. He is out to, you do. I can help you get him on, but, well, if you want, I'm not going to subject, that's it. I've had 2 discussions with him. He's intellectually dishonest, and all he wants to do is win a debate. That's all I've got.
Uh-huh.
Oh, I'm sorry. I've been muted this entire time. Let me just real quick. Let me run that by you guys again. I'm sorry, I was muted.
Oh, I could hear you just fine, but yeah, they were saying
I
muted.
was hard
Oh
muted on the
man.
outside. So real quick, I was just a 30-second recap. I was saying that I tend to property dualism, which would be that the mind and the body come from a physical source physicalism, where you have an emergence property, which is the mental state. The theist would generally say that the mind and the brain are two different things, right? The brain is the physical substrate, and the mind is something that exists independently of that, whether it be substance dualism or the mind of God. I've never experienced anything where I have the consciousness independent of a body or a mind. I don't know what that would even look like. I don't know how you make an abductive argument if we've never seen a consciousness that did not have some kind of physical substrate to it. We've never seen this. It is a lousy abductive argument because an abductive argument is based upon priors. We've never, and you can believe that the mind can exist independently. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't have a problem with that. Again, I don't tend to substance dualism. But like neutral monism, which I try to explain, you can have a substance, and from that substance, whatever that is, that neutral substance, then you have physical and you have mental, but it's still one substance it comes from. Whatever that is, it's some kind of neutral thing, but it doesn't necessarily by any means have anything to do with God. Because again, how do you have a consciousness that doesn't have a physical substrate? That's just my personal interpretation of philosophy. There you go. Sorry. My 30-second, 40-minute rant.
I think we are, rational animals, and I think we are, can do abstraction and use rationality distinct from the animals who can participate in some way, because I think God created everything on a template of rationality, and I think that's how rationality can exist. But in his 1986 article, Frank Jackson gives a superb argument for the existence of qualia. There would be things a person could not know by simply studying the physical characteristics of the brain, of the density of the brain, of the properties of vision and so forth, until they actually see colors. So, there's a number of arguments for why we aren't simply, our brains or physical, against physicalism. And I think something like dualism, interactionism, where the mind can have effects on the brain and the brain can have effects on the mind, I think that's far more plausible and far more commonsensical.
But Josh, you can have that in property dualism. I mean, the physicality of the mind can be supervened by the mental, and we know it works both ways. We regardless of whether we understand or not, we do. I think everybody believes that it goes both ways. We have a mental thought, we can convey it to an action, which is the part of the mind-body problem. But at the same token, we have a physical action that can be converted into a mental. So we don't know how this works, right? A consciousness is inert in and of itself. It's a mental state, just like the number 2 can't do anything. But we know that a mental state, for some reason, allows action. Me gesticulating is because I have a mental thought and I've conveyed it to physical action. That's confusing. It's really difficult to wrap your head around that because
hard problem of consciousness.
It's a hard problem of consciousness. Exactly. It's a very difficult problem in mind-body to try to understand that. But we haven't seen. But you haven't answered the question. We have never seen a mind independent of a physical substrate. If you want to posit Jesus,
no, of course not.
Okay, then
of course not.
Then
We
it's
haven't
fine to
seen
posit
it.
Jesus, right? Jesus had a brain and then he had a mind. But how do you posit as an abductive argument a being that has a mind, which is out without body, which we've never seen before? How is that abductively rational?
For the mind, I'm giving, I think there's other arguments like philosophical arguments and how physicalism doesn't give us all the knowledge, right? For the mind. I think Frank Jackson's article, What Mary Didn't Know, even though he retracted it, I think he still makes good points that you can know things such as qualia, such as the redness and the roundness, such as qualia, not John Locke's, the properties that are like weight and length and so forth. I don't think that's all that exists. I think it's almost a physicalism of the gaps. And I think a person needs to be humble and look at these indicators that show that we aren't simply physical bodies, but there's something immaterial in us. So I'm not giving an inductive argument. I'm just trying to give a philosophical argument, an abductive argument.
I gotta wrap it up here, guys. Craig, you haven't spoken in a while. Do you want to like add something to this?
I would just say the hard problem of consciousness is one of the things I would define it as consciousness being in principle irreducible to strictly physical properties. It does force you. I don't argue for substance dualism for exactly the reason you cite, because you are asserting something basically without evidence. There's a soul, prove it. So, but it does force you, like Bernardo Castro became an idealist because he recognized, or he thought, that the hard problem of consciousness brought him to the end of physicalism as a prior metaphysic. So he switched his metaphysics in response, and now he will insist that his metaphysics are consistent with the science. So he argues for a kind of distended consciousness thingy, that we're all separate consciousness within. I don't argue for that either, because that needs to be proved too. It's a bit of a speculative leap. There's the Donald Hoffman version of idealism that I think is actually really parsimonious. Consciousness is my ontological primitive. I experience the world through my consciousness. We are all conscious agents tethered together. This computer was built by conscious agents. So I think you do need to adjust your metaphysics in response to the hard problem of consciousness. I don't think you can argue for a soul. Same reason, like, who's the guy who argues for the soul? He goes, here's the hard problem of consciousness. Here are these interesting thought experiments. This proves a soul, and then he loses the debate because it doesn't prove a soul.
John Hicks?
No,
because he has a theodicy based on the soul building exercise.
J.P. Moreland?
J.P. Moreland, thank you.
Okay.
But I know we're about to go, but do you think we could just for 10 minutes discuss miracles? Because a lot of people mention that, and we never got. Okay.
Before we do that, I just want to take a quick straw poll here, Craig. So in and of itself, the position of atheism as a whole, do you believe atheism is rational, or at least can be rationalized? Again, it's hard to make a generalized statement saying some position isn't rational. I don't know how anybody can make that statement. But do you believe that at least atheism can be rational?
Yes, I argued that in the beginning.
Yeah, I thought so. Okay. And Jim, you would agree? I would hope.
Well, yeah. The title of this, it seems like it would be impossible to take the affirmative stance and then just concede in the first 5 minutes. But I understand. Yeah.
Oh no, we won in the first 2 minutes. You heard my opening statement. We won.
Yes.
Okay, just make sure. Yeah. All right. So Josh, you want to talk about? By the way, what is your final stand on that? Do you think atheism could ever be rational?
My final stand is that every atheist is made in the image of God and lives like a theist by accepting various presuppositions. Well, no, I don't think it's rational to be an atheist.
So no atheist is rational in their position.
I think they live inconsistently.
That doesn't answer the question.
I don't know how to answer that question.
It's pretty simple. Do you believe there could be an atheist that has a rational belief that God doesn't exist? Is that possible?
Not with looking at all the evidence.
Let me say this: theism is absolutely, oftentimes, very rational. I have met numerous theists that have made rational, cogent points, convincing points. It didn't meet the level of criteria for me, not acceptable level of criteria for me to believe, but if they were rational arguments.
Yeah, I mean, there are many theists out there that are very rational in their beliefs. I mean, I find Craig, be very rational in his position. Don't have to agree with him. Doesn't mean I have to accept this as philosophy, but he understands philosophy very well, and he has a cogent way of looking at his positions. And it's very difficult to say they're right or wrong, because most of them are so philosophical that there is no fact in the matter to be had there, right?
Right. When you get down into philosophy done well, it's two high-level chess players with robust, defendable positions.
Exactly.
And it's like when you watch
two
stock guys. They talk about Tesla, and one guy takes the bull case, the other guy takes the bear case, and it's impossible to decide between them who's right and who's wrong, because they have robust justifications for the position.
I love that. I love that. Can I steal that from you? That philosophy on a high level is just like two chess players, and neither one can actually win. I think the best they can hope for is a draw. Yeah.
But that's when you look to how they live their lives. Do they live it with reasons, with explanations? Do they live it thoroughly in a rational way, or do they try to explain away certain pieces of evidence?
I don't think so, because Jim doesn't. Jim will incorporate new evidence, and Jim says, look, yeah, sure, the Bible's evidence. It's not strong evidence. I find it to be very weak evidence, but it is a history text. I've had
Bible's horrible.
Beginning.
Start with fine-tuning argument and quantum entanglement, and you might have me.
Fine-tuning is a lot more complicated than people think, too. But here's the thing.
Again,
what's like the Bible? I've had atheists tell me the Bible isn't even of a historical significance. I'm like, are you kidding me? You've lost the plot. Yeah. You've gone. I'm not a fan of the Bible. I don't study the Bible. I'm not interested in the Bible. But the people that are atheists, they know the Bible in depth, and they recognize it as a history book because they like history. It's very, very pertinent. There's a lot of influence on people over thousands.
It's all hearsay and wouldn't be admitted in a court of law, but it is still history, yes.
I don't think all hearsay. I mean, look, there's certain things in there we know to be the case, but I mean, that doesn't mean that any of the whole. I mean, we know that certain cities exist. That's not hearsay. And by the way, hearsay evidence can be admissible in certain cases. Excited declarations, state of mind things. There are various things that admit hearsay evidence, but that doesn't mean that because Jerusalem exists, the flood happened. I very much believe the flood did not happen. I'm absolutely convinced to almost a certainty, right? I mean, you need some pretty significant evidence to convince me there's a flood, of a worldwide flood, right?
I think it was a local flood. I do think it was a local flood.
If it was local, why did they have to scoop up all the animals to save them? And then why even bring birds on board? It's inconsistent.
That story was obviously, manifested afterwards, but could there be a local flood? Sure, I got no problem with that. But I think, Josh, you do agree there was no Noah's Ark, right?
Oh, I don't know.
Really?
Maybe there was.
Really?
I don't know how many animals, if it was a local flood or if it was a global flood, because a lot of cultures testify to a flood. What are we just supposed to ignore?
Most cultures were fine. It's many different
they have
dynasties.
Flood stories.
No, many different, but there are different times, and just because like the Pope of Wu has a mythos
you don't
of the
think
flood,
that they can. You don't think that they can draw back to an ancient common source? But you don't think that's possible?
They even had very different time periods, and so no, it wasn't a common source.
Sure,
it wasn't even dealing with Mesopotamia.
Maybe it's. All I'm saying is.
So you think the Ark could have happened? You think that? Well, hang on. You think the Ark could have happened? The animals and
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Joshua, I'm just going to say this, and this is as a friend. Okay. When you even entertain that idea, it discredits your good ideas.
It really does. I'm going to agree with Jim on this because you're not a young Earth creationist, though, right, Josh? I know you're not.
No.
Yeah. No. So why would you entertain something so mind-bogglingly? I hate that.
Because I don't know if it was a local flood.
But that doesn't mean there's an ark that has animals that carried him to another. That started a whole new. Like all life died except for 8 people. That doesn't entail that by any stretch of imagination.
Yeah, I don't know how that's. I think a lot of people can be rational and hold to that. I haven't studied it. I haven't looked into it, but I do know different cultures, having taught history, that a lot of different cultures have flood accounts in them. So it'd be
at different time periods, but not as far as like a biblical account. They're very different things.
Well, we don't know how far back the biblical account is.
6,000 years old, and the flood happened 6,000 years ago, and Noah built an ark. What he's saying is there could have been. The known world at the time was flooded by some sort of cataclysmic flood thing.
There's no evidence of that in any consistent period. No, there would have been, if there was a worldwide flood, then all the cultures at the time would have had some kind of indication.
Local flood.
Well, yeah, that's fine with the local flood.
But in many places, it was cribbed word for word from the Epic of Gilgamesh, and even before that, the Enuma Elish, like literally millennia before.
Yeah, we know flood stories
he was
exist,
even put pen to paper. Yeah,
absolutely.
So
we know
why
exist.
is it? Why does the atheist or anybody want to discount that information? I mean, it seems to me that to be humble, to be open-minded, you're gonna have to look at the evidence and say it could have could have happened. It could have been a common source from thousands of years ago.
Josh,
you had me here when you like something like this, or there's so many, there's numerous examples, but when this is a hill you want to try to die on, it really did.
No, it's not.
Look,
no, I know, but you're just opening up
because I don't
keeping
know
the possibility alive that it could happen. It really detracts from really good arguments that you have.
I think
you
you're
should
right.
abandon those bad arguments. It would really help your good arguments.
And let me ask you this.
Well, it is a historical argument. I'm not trying to argue if it did or not, but I do think that there are reasons in other parts of the Bible to say that they're good arguments or good historical reasons.
Do you believe? And I'm losing my light here, so we gotta wrap it up here soon.
Okay.
Do you?
I guess no miracles.
We may be able to touch on it for a second there, but real quick, if I asked you like the age of the Earth, even though there's a bare possibility the Earth could have been created yesterday, last Thursday, right? The Omphalos hypothesis. These are possibilities, right? But it's also logically possible that pigs can fly out of my ass and spit silver dollars. That's not illogical. That is nomologically impossible. That is biologically impossible, but it's not illogical as far as logic. It's not a logical impossibility. There's distinctions to be made there. So yes, it is logically possible that the Earth is 6,000 years old. But as far as science and everything else, would you agree it's such a minimal bare possibility to the point of there's not even something to be entertained, even though it's a bare logical possibility. But when I ask you like the age of the Earth, would you use that argument then? Because I know you think the Earth is billions of years old, right?
Yes,
yeah, so
billions of years.
Yeah.
But here's why: because when you're dealing with history, it's a different subject than science. You don't deal with the repeatable, but you deal with the singular occurrences. For example, the forensic sciences or archaeology; those deal with unrepeatable events. The same way with miracles, you try to measure their plausibility from a whole different set of factors, criteria of embarrassment, criteria of authenticity, many
five
factors.
fact things. Yeah, we that's a whole different show. We can do that next time. Okay, the 5 factors. We know those arguments.
But this is not a hill that I want to. I mean, you are saying this is not a hill I want to die on. I'm just saying, if I want to be open-minded, I mean, it could come from a common source that's thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
That predates
That's all
the
I was
Bible.
saying.
That accounts for both. That's what he's saying. It's not implausible.
Yeah.
I had a guy on my show that firmly believed that it was a guided missile that hit the Pentagon.
Oh yeah.
Instead of a jet.
Yeah.
I entertained that notion. And I tried to remain open-minded, but the preponderance of evidence restricted me from even coming to any sort of conclusion that would even come close to what he was talking about.
Yeah. So by the way,
video recordings.
We're gonna have
don't have video recordings for the Noah's Ark to say it's implausible. And
oh yeah, no, we don't need a record that says
event.
implausible. It's super implausible. It's like it's so biologically.
According to what induction?
Biology.
Well, then
biology,
is that how you're discounting miracles?
Phylogeny, cadestics, but you're not positing that is a miracle.
Josh,
Noah's Ark is not positive as a miracle.
Because we're almost out of time.
The flood, sure, but
okay.
But
let's go to miracles.
But hang on, I've never.
I'm just going to say I don't know one way or the other.
I've never heard even a young Earth creationist posit the Ark as a miracle. Not one. So, by the way, we're going to talk about physics in a couple weeks. Somebody had asked about Compton scattering. We're going to be doing a thing on physics, hopefully next month. But yeah, I know Compton scattering is because I took physics. But go ahead. Inelastic collision of a photon into a charged particle that results in an incidental angle of deflection. Yeah. Compton scattering.
Let me just say this about miracles, because I know you want to wrap up. I think theism is on a better epistemic ground than atheism, because it can leave open the possibility of a purported historical event being actually a miracle or actually being caused by natural factors. The atheist, it seems to me, has to discount all the historical evidence and do this on a priori philosophical grounds.
All right, Jim, you wanted to? Greg, you have anything to add? Then let Jim have the last word. Actually, I get the last word because
I don't really have anything to add. Craig has something though.
The belief in miracles. If you were trying to do if you were trying to do a steel man of the position, you would the most logical thing you would do is try to if you're an atheist or an agnostic, you tend to think supernatural miracles don't occur. You could actually try to cause doubt on that presupposition. That would be the way to actually go about falsifying the proposition. So you would, what most atheists do is go to the least plausible miracles, like Jesus in a burrito in Mexico, and go, it didn't happen.
The tortilla in Mexico. Yeah, that's a miracle. Yes.
Jesus appeared in toast yesterday. Probably didn't happen. But there are a lot of miracles that you could actually erode. You could use to erode your prior that miracles don't occur. You know, just by talking to people at a local church who tell you XYZ when this parade. Even Steve has a supernatural story that he shared on my. I don't think it qualifies as a miracle necessarily, but an event that was inexplicable according to natural.
I think we all have those things, don't you? Though I mean, I want to call it a supernatural experience. I'm saying that I can see how people are going to interpret it as such. Absolutely, right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think everybody has. Aaron Ra has talked about that many times, that he's had experiences he can't explain. Doesn't necessarily mean supernatural. And I think
has he actually said the experiences?
Oh yeah,
what they were.
Yeah, he's gone into detail before. It's rare, but he has. But I mean, here's the thing though. Those experiences to me just don't conclude anything. It's just hard to make any kind of really conclusion out of it because we don't have the data set to be able to derive what actually those things were. And most of the time still, we always seem to find a natural explanation, and we know our brains are not perfect. We know we don't apprehend things perfectly. We know we interpret things incorrectly. So even then, it's more likely the case there's a completely naturalistic explanation, but a bare possibility in itself does not, to me, sufficient justification to warrant a belief in something that we have no background for. And by the way, I'm agnostic.
If I can ask you, why, Steve, why do you want to seek a rational, naturalistic explanation in this case and not just call it a brute fact? I mean,
well, I don't think brute facts are irrational. They may be irrational, but there's certain things we have to accept as a brute fact. Reality existing is a brute fact to me.
But why do you look for an explanation? Well, I don't understand.
Humans are hardwired to want to understand things, right? But there's certain things we may not understand. Look, there are types of math I'll never understand. It's just beyond my ability, my brain to do. I can't do it. And I accept things axiomatically. Like, for example, I accept that Jim exists as a sentient entity outside of my own consciousness. I follow solipsism, right? But that's an assumption. That's an assumption.
Yeah, it's an assumption.
Yeah, same thing with induction working day after day. It's an assumption. Right. We can't justify that.
The only thing I would add to
rational, but it's not irrational.
Wait, can I add before? The only thing I'd add to what Steve just said, which I agree with what he just said, is that the reason why I always go to religious experiences is because that's what turned me into a believer. And the hard part about translating that into a third-person argument is it's entirely subjective and internal. And I recognize that difficulty.
Yes, bridging that chasm. But I think that's one of the strongest arguments for atheists to justify themselves is personal experience. If they look, if I remember the movie Contact, if I was Jodie Foster and I got taken away to another planet and I experienced that, I know what happened in my mind's eye. All right. But I can't convey it to anybody. There's no evidence that the data was wiped, even though there's 8 hours of static. But still, it is not an experience I can convey to anybody because it is definitely subjective. It means that you cannot access it, right? Subjective isn't meaning like evaluatory. The subjective means that it is epistemically isolated from you. You cannot objectively look at something from my qualia. You can't experience my pain. It is subjective. I'm not saying people have this weird thing about subjectivity. Subjectivity isn't, I think it's between 0 and 10 on a pain scale. No, that's not what we mean in its context of philosophy. What we mean by subjective is that you can't experience my pain, period. It's off limits to you.
Right. It's an isolated, but
it's isolated, right?
To the person who experiences the subjective awareness, it is some of the most powerful form of evidentiary warrants.
And if I saw God, I'd probably believe it. I'd be right on your guys' side. If Jesus wanted,
well, the example I use is my faith in my wife's character is reinforced by my experience of my wife, and it cannot be argued independent of my experience of her. And it's the same sort of epistemic.
But you've never seen.
See what I mean?
You never hung out with Jesus, right?
No, but we could go into this for hours because
I agree with you on that, though. Look, even if Jim would have to admit, and let's say Jim assumes rationality as far as he's not, but let's say that Jim isn't mental. If Jesus started talking to him, he wouldn't probably give a damn what anybody else thought. He'd be like, "Yeah, here's Jesus. We hung out. He took me up, saw the heavens, blah blah blah, and know, he's going to do what he has to do. I get that. There's no way he can convince like myself that he's had that experience.
I would need blind study, blind study though, peer-reviewed blind studies to make sure that I'm not hallucinating.
Sure.
There would be ways to observe it. A third party would have to intervene.
But arguendo, let's just say that you are of competency, and that did happen. Let's say it is a fact. Let's for the sake of argument, Jesus existed. He was like, hey, I'm going to come have lunch with you, Jim. It would be hard pressed to not accept that at that point, right? I mean, who cares? But
my good friend Josh, he's a pastor, albeit he is a believer, but he's had two such experiences. One, audible voice told him he was going to receive a phone call to go speak in LA, and then the phone rang. And once he was in the shower, and God told him something else audibly.
I do, but I've had audible hallucinations. They're called hypnagogic hallucinations. And an audible is hypnagogic, and there's hypnagogic and audible hallucinations. I've had those when you're in lucid dream states, sleep paralysis. People can hear things. I mean, literally, like one ear, verbally, clear as freaking day. I heard something, and then I've heard in other voices, in other words, full sentences, full on sentences. And the one the voice I heard was a very kind of a low but monotone voice. It just said, "Why not?" Because I was asking a question. I saw this figure.
To kill them.
Well, I saw this figure that looked like a shadow demon hovering over me, and it wasn't. It didn't seem like it was, malignant or evil intentions. It was just hovering there. And I'm curious, right? Because I've had so many lucid dreams, and I'm just like, oh wow, this is really cool. I'm having a lucid dream, and I'm checking it out. And I remember, I don't remember the question I asked or something, but I just heard this voice at the same time in my ear say very clearly, "Why not?" I will never forget that. But again, when you're in a lucid state, we know these things happen. We know people have hallucinations. We know they have auditory hallucinations. I don't attribute any of that what happened to me to supernatural at all. It doesn't even make sense to, because I wasn't scared. I was like, yeah, this is pretty cool. It's just interesting to me.
One reason that because I've tried to investigate the resurrection and try to apply these theories to the view that Jesus did not rise from the dead. Because I want to be sure. I want to be certain. I can. The hallucination theory is probably the top naturalistic alternative to the resurrection, and I just think it falls apart because it's so many group appearances that Jesus had. That's why I place high confidence that Jesus was who he said he was, because of the...
All right, well, a couple different things, Josh, before we wrap it up. All the Gospels have different accountings. Two, we have the Fatima, where the sun, 300 people saw something happen, right? Doesn't necessarily be the case. People in Islam believe they've seen miracles. That it doesn't have to be hallucination. There's other hallucinations or other explanations. But again, if you apply one standard that, I'm going to believe the testimony because, the Gospels, well, why not believe the miracle of Fatima? There's 300 people that witnessed that. That's
I do believe it.
50,000 people saw the Lady of Fatima.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I mean, if I'm open-minded, I'm gonna believe it. And that's one reason that I've been drawn to the Catholic faith, just because I was a Protestant for so long. Then I started looking at the evidence.
You missed our discussion the other day, and I'll wrap it up with that. Jim and I had a discussion on the Catholic Church. The guy didn't show. He was scared. No, I'm just kidding. He had technical issues. But it was a good discussion. But anyway, guys, let's wrap this up. We're going to do more on these. I got debates coming up, everything from more along these lines to, is hot dog a sandwich kind of stuff. We're going to have fun. Looking forward to it. So thank you guys for watching. Anything you guys want to add to plug your channels, go ahead and do it now. Atheist Edge, plug your stuff.
Just Google Atheist Edge. You'll find everything. That's it.
Craig, what do you got for us?
Go watch Craig Reed TCR. Debate Me Bro versus Philosophical Atheist was the last video I put out. And the video before that, actually, Sabina Hassenfelder versus Bernardo Castro, pertinent to the conversation on physics and idealism versus physicalism.
By the way, I did watch your Debate Me Bro video. I'm not going to do a review on it because not much I could really... There wasn't much meat on there that I can really latch onto to disagree with. It's a good video, though. Should be worth watching. Does that make sense? I didn't take umbrage with what you said on it. So usually I do a review when I think there's kind of issues. I didn't really see much of issues there, but I do agree with you on the Debate Me Bros. They're just ridiculous. All right, Josh.
My Twitter is Christ is Risen 9. I also like to talk about MMA and movies. So just reach me there.
All right,
Dude, we could have had the whole show about this.
We'll make that
That's my jam, dude.
Can we have an MMA pre-show sometime?
That would be awesome.
I'm
really into the, MMA is one of the only sports. I think it's the sport where females are going to not only they're going to exceed the male version. I think that's what's going to happen. I think the female fighters are way more fun to watch right now, more entertaining. And you don't get that in any other pro sport. I think it's going to make some breakthroughs.
Anyways, I'm sitting here in the dark now because I didn't turn on the lights beforehand. I don't want to get up to go do it. So anyways, guys, thanks for watching this. We appreciate it. Love you guys. All you guys have been supporting us and the Non-Sequitur Show. We're going to continue to try to put stuff out, and hopefully, people get something out of it. I say, look, 1 viewer or 1,000 viewers. If the content is good, content is good. And this was actually a great discussion, guys. I really thought this was fun. Well,
it's the anti-dumpster fire.
Well, I'm going to put the dumpster fire up there anyways. And Jesus, I don't know if you guys were seeing this, but Jesus actually was outside, so you're watching out after the fact. All right, guys, have a good night, and I'm going to end the call.
Take care.